My name's Bill Anderson. I'd like to thank you all for joining today's webinar titled How Asset-Heavy Companies Are Transforming with Microsoft Power Platform. So first, I'd like to introduce Sean Usselton. Sean spent the last 6 years of his career as the Director of Corporate Technology for Golden Spread Electric Cooperative. They're a Sonata client and an avid proponent of the Microsoft Power Platform. He holds an MBA in Computer Information Systems from West Texas A&M University and resides in the greater Amarillo area. So welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
So next, meet Ashwini Sharma. He's a 24-year veteran of Microsoft, and he's currently Group Program Manager focused on robotic process automation and the Microsoft Power Platform. So Ashwini holds a BS in Computer Engineering from the Carnegie Mellon University, and he lives in Seattle, Washington. So welcome, Ash.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Last, not least, we have Matt Fole. Matt's a longtime entrepreneur, and he spent the last 15 years working with project and field service-centric companies around the globe. So today he's the Vice President of Services Sector Solutions for Sonata, and he's your host for today's event. So Matt, welcome, and the mic is yours.
Thanks, Bill. I kind of feel like we're like a mini NBA team the way you announce this, kind of come into this. So thanks everybody for joining us. This is really about educational kind of roundtable discussion. So hopefully we can make it interactive in really sharing three perspectives, client perspective as it relates to how, in this case, asset intensive, Sean's business being utility, and really how they're kind of going through transformation and how different tools like model-driven apps can help ease transformation and while you're looking at bigger system kind of change over time. Also have Ash that is going to give kind of Microsoft perspective and what Microsoft is doing and what their vision is, and then I'll share some of our perspective as it relates to what we're seeing the market go through, how we're seeing customers kind of deal with it, and some methods and ways of making it de-risking the process, and also ways to move transformation forward. So I think first and foremost, why asset intensive businesses, why we kind of chose that, one, obviously that's something we heavily focus on, whether that be manufacturing, oil and gas, utilities, and or even construction. If you look at kind of what do we have in common, it's really a lot of it has to do with risk, and so when you think about these large capital assets that we have and we operate that are core to our business, so assets are a key part of the business as it relates to the products and services that we bring to market, and the uptime and the effectiveness of that uptime and the resilience of that uptime is critical to our business. And so, and the complexity of our infrastructure and our ecosystem is quite widespread. And so as a result of that, we have a lot of systems, we have a lot of different practices and policies and processes that are in place that ultimately make the operation of those successful and ultimately make the operation of the business successful. So with that kind of as a foundation, it becomes very difficult to modernize and upgrade systems because the uncoupling of these different ecosystems becomes highly risk, and the option for downtime or the impact of downtime, in some cases could be catastrophic. And whether you're looking at it from a customer's perspective or even a safety perspective. So it makes transformation very difficult. And as a result, a lot of these industries have been lagging because of these constrictions. And so what we're seeing and what we'll talk about today is, what are different alternatives to transformation. And when you kind of look at where, and we'll talk a little bit about maturity later in the presentation, but you kind of have a couple options that you see companies going through right now. One is, really that wholesale change. So we're going to look at replacing our ERP system, or look at replacing and upgrading our EAM system, or it's control system related, or there's some mission critical systems that are in place that we organically customized over time. They're key to the business, but they're outdated. And they have a very difficult kind of working with other ecosystems, and or they maybe have a ton of data in there that we can't monetize and leverage across the business. It's specific to the operation of the business from the asset side, not specific from the business side. And then you've kind of got the status quo, which is a lot of what we went through with COVID, and ultimately companies kind of hitting that rock bottom point of saying, status quo is not an option anymore, which has been interesting with COVID. I think it's one of the first times you saw such a massive impact where the market unanimously changed across industries, and people are at different stages, but realizing that we have to modernize and we have to transform. And so kind of what we're going to talk about today and what is, you're seeing a lot of out there is that, hey, we're not ready for that disruption. So doing wholesale change, it's too disruptive, and it's too costly, and we've got other priorities. But how can we start to digitize the business, either for better customer benefit, better partnership with our partners and how we work with our partners, or even our own employees in the company? And so what you're seeing is solutions like we're going to talk about today, which are model-driven apps, which are low-code kind of easier ways that both the IT organization as well with the business can start to modernize and either create a unified UI while we're kind of replacing the legacy backend elements, or we're digitizing certain work processes and certain stakeholders. It's a very effective way to efficiently start to modernize the business while we take time modernizing the bigger pillars within the business, and we can start to recognize value faster in some cases. So today we'll talk a little bit, Ash will kind of deeper dive here, but the Microsoft platform is really the power platform. I think the key thing that you'll see theme-wise here, and where we see a lot of companies kind of get sideways, is you really got to think about it as a platform. And that's not meaning from a complicated perspective. It's just meaning in this cloud world, in this app world, in this digital world, that there are many factors to be considered as it relates to setting up the proper governance and the building blocks as it relates to really getting the value or driving value through these tools. Although they are low code and canvas type of tools that, and in many cases, business users can drive their own direction, you still need to have kind of that center of excellence mentality as it relates to these are platforms, and you need to build the right building blocks to effectively create value in the business. So Sean, give us a little perspective. I know you all have been on a journey for some time, and I'll share my perspective as having the fortune of being business partners with you all. As an IT organization, you all have always kind of been, I think, pushing the envelope. You made a great comment the other day, which is I think we're one step behind bleeding edge, or we're closely behind bleeding edge, which is, particularly in the utility space, that is, you're an innovator, because most of the utility space is very risk adverse, and let's see what others do, and then we'll kind of come next until we really have to go there. But please share your thoughts and your all story a little bit, and what you all are kind of have done and where you're going.
Oh, good. Thanks, Matt. As Matt mentioned, go ahead, Bill. We are a consumer-owned public utility or a cooperative. We were actually formed in 1984 from a few cooperatives here in the Texas Panhandle area, and we've grown since the original creation of our cooperative in 1984. Now we have 16 electric cooperatives that make up who Golden Spread Electric Cooperative is, and we are a generation and transmission cooperative, and so we generate, buy, sell power on the energy markets for our distribution cooperatives, which actually sell the energy to the end user consumers. Currently, we serve a little over 300,000 electric meters that covers roughly 24% of the state of Texas. And so we actually also cover some of Oklahoma, a little bit of Kansas and Colorado. So overall, our geographic area that we cover is about the size of the state of Georgia. So we have a pretty good wide, range of where we travel to, what, the cooperatives that we support. And so we've got a decent amount, even though we are rural, so we're spread out. It does present a little bit of challenges for us, and I'll get into some of that here in just a second. And as Matt mentioned, we are very asset heavy. We own 3 power plants and 1 wind farm. We have our power plants are all natural gas fired engines, and so we have $1 billion in assets, not including the wind farm that we own and run. So we do have a significant investment in assets, and so keeping that in mind, it it's important to us to make sure that we're able to use those assets effectively while still, leveraging the technology to be able to support, the employees that work there and the employees here in the office that support and augment the main core of the business. Next, I'd like to just go over just a few items in here of kind of what Golden Spread holds as our key pillars of technology. Several of these in here are aligned with many different organizations and some of the key strategies that IT organizations follow, but some of the few that we take pride in, that we really kind of strive for, is one, we really try to develop our relationships with our fellow employees as partners. IT is a partner in what we're trying to accomplish from a business perspective. We're not necessarily order takers. So with that being said, we go to the business with ideas. We really try to understand their problems, their business processes, and as we get into what they're doing on a daily basis and we understand what their processes are, we can come to them with technology solutions that could solve their problems for them that they are not aware of. We just don't sit back and wait for them to come to us, because at that point, that's where the legacy utility mentality comes from of, you kind of get stagnant in some of the ways you're doing things. So we've been able to innovate a little bit by really partnering with our business and encouraging them to drive change in what they're trying to do. Now, as with any type of change, that can be difficult at times, but because we're there with them and we know that and they know that we're not going anywhere, they're much more willing to kind of, dig in and understand where we're trying to go as an organization and IT. We also deploy solutions that are aligned with the digital industry trends, both from an IT perspective and a utility perspective. So we definitely don't want to go off, and try to do our own thing. We like Microsoft, and that's why we have kind of just went all in on the Microsoft platform in all areas, not just the Power Platform, because we know that Microsoft's going to be driving that direction for us. And so it's allowed us to really leverage their expertise and what they've been able to provide, not only us, but our business. And so we've been able to see that benefit from the continual innovation that Microsoft's providing. And as Matt mentioned, we adopt proven technology as fast followers. We are not bleeding edge. We don't try to be bleeding edge. Every once in a while, we'll try to dip our toe in that bleeding edge, and we kind of pull it back just a little bit. But but the fast followers mentality has helped us be on the forefront, especially with COVID. We just to kind of illustrate, whenever Microsoft Teams came out, we pushed Teams to our organization 3 years ago. Whenever it was originally launched, and it was pretty painful because they didn't quite understand, they didn't know the why, and but we didn't give up. We kept pushing it, and they started using it on the daily basis. And whenever everyone had to go home and work from the office, it was no issue, because everyone had been using Teams as a daily basis of how their communication was at that time for a year. So it really helped kind of push the fast follower mentality and gain the business's trust in what we're trying to do. They saw that fruit, and so it really kind of helped us move forward.
It's interesting, Sean, to hear you talk. I mean, just the consciousness that your IT organization has, of the business and with the business, I think is so key. And I think a lot of times that you'll see, IT is off kind of solving what they think is right for the business, but there's a disconnect to the business, and at the same time, the importance of building that trust, because at the end of the day, one can't survive without the other if you want to get to the outcomes that both are trying to achieve. So it's great to hear that, and it's a great example of a successful partnership between business and IT.
Absolutely, we take great pride in that, and it's been successful for us, and we hope to continue that success and build on that relationship that we've had throughout the organization so far. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about how Golden Spread has utilized the Power Platform and how we went through and started implementing the various pieces of it over time. So, whenever we looked at the Power Platform and we started going in it, it wasn't termed the Power Platform, right? We had these different pieces of Microsoft technology that we looked at, say, how could we utilize these and from a business perspective? And that allowed us to implement these technologies in really, bite-sized ways. We didn't go at a full stop of, okay, let's just try to drop everything in at once, because that was going to be very, that would not be palatable to the business, right? Kind of going into just a wholesale change of everything that they're trying to do. So by moving small things, that's allowed us to kind of introduce the technology over time. So, it all started 6 or 7 years ago with Office 365, getting the core Microsoft, infrastructure in place from email, Active Directory, and then from there, growing into SharePoint, that stuff. But eventually that ran into Power BI and the Power BI integration, because we wanted to look at, hey, how do we visualize, how do we analyze some of this data? Because we're looking at data that is, hundreds of terabytes of data, because we're looking at meter data in 5-minute intervals every day for years, right? So this data that we're looking at is very, very large amount of data, and how we're trying to process it, and how can we leverage Power BI to be able to do that? So we've partnered with some external, energy partners that analyze this market data, and we bring in a lot of that data from a Power BI perspective and process that over yearly, so we can look at industry trends, weather patterns, all that fun stuff. But then specifically on a daily basis, we use the Power BI integration with Dynamics 365, both customer engagement and for finance and operations. Because it's important for our organizations to stay in tune with what our cooperative is trying to do. And when I mean our cooperative, I'm talking about essentially our 16 customers. Granted, you might think that, oh, you only have 16 customers, but these are our owners. They essentially tell us what we need to be doing on a daily basis. So we leverage CE and to be able to track that as a sales tool, essentially, but to make notes. And then all of those notes filter up through Power BI so that our executive team can, at a moment's notice on their mobile phone, on their laptop, they can pull that up, filter that directly for that cooperative. Let's say our CEO is going to go visit a cooperative down in South Texas. She can pull that up, look at all the latest information that's going on with our sales team and what's going on, and she has access to that, essentially real-time information. We also use it integration with our finance and operations implementation for cash flow analysis with a real-time integration with the API for Dynamics 365. They're able to pull that Power BI up and filter directly some of the data that they would have access to in Dynamics 365, but they may have to run a report, make a change, run another report. Now they can use filtering and dynamically pull the data that they need at a moment's notice. A few years ago, we also started looking at Power Apps and how we would implement Power Apps, and this was before the model-driven apps concept came into place. And we actually implemented a Canvas app, and it's still used to this day. We've made a few changes, but with a territory the size of the state of Georgia, we have project managers that travel quite a bit. So they're kind of like our sales guys, but they're always traveling around the state doing different types of projects for our power plants and helping out our customers. And these project managers, they used a multitude of tools to track their projects. Some used Excel, some used Microsoft Project Web App for SharePoint Online, some used Visio, some used the local Microsoft Project installation on their laptop. So none of them had any sort of standardization of how they track their projects. So what we did is we built a Microsoft a Power App, Canvas app, that allowed them to be able to enter milestone reporting. So we weren't getting into a lot of the details, the tracking, anything of the daily minutia of kind of what they do. But this Power App allowed them to go in and quickly put in milestone information, make some notes, and then that information filtered up to our executive team, and they could visualize that as Gantt charts and a calendar view, so they could kind of see what's going on without really changing the day-to-day operations of what our project managers were doing, because they like to manage their projects their way. Recently, we started digging into a little bit more from the model-driven apps perspective. the Canvas apps concept, while it's very flexible, it allows you to do a lot of things. Sometimes the development from that perspective takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of iteration to get that going. There's a little more of the formulas. You have a little more control, actually a lot more control of what you're trying to do, but it takes a little more time to dev that, cycle it, build that connection up. So then we started looking at some model-driven apps, and model-driven apps were like, fantastic for us because it allowed us to rapidly develop applications for our end users that they could access from any device, from their mobile phone, from their laptop, from their tablet, and they could have access to that even from an offline perspective. Because believe it or not, in Texas, rural Texas, there are places where you don't have cell coverage. And so they still needed access to some of this information throughout the state, as they're traveling. So we built a couple of model-driven apps. One of them is our information governance database that's we're kind of working through right now. And it's the nice thing about it is we just built the model, and from there it just kind of drove the interface for us. We went in and made a few field changes, but overall there's no change. I mean, there was no coding or anything like that we had to do. We just made some few UI changes to make it how they wanted it to look and move forward. We also have an HR solution that allows them to benchmark salaries and track information from that perspective. So they really like that because it ties in with the UI of CE, of D365 CE, because they're familiar with that and how they use that right now, and it looks identical. It's using the same platform. And I'll move on to how we've leveraged Power Automate. We use Microsoft Power Automate right now to do several workflows. Some of those workflows are integrated in directly with Dynamics 365 CE and F&O. But one of the ones that we've done to help automate some processes is we have, as a utility, we own a lot of land also, and so we have investors that like to come and maybe want to build data centers or something that needs to use electricity or even generate maybe a wind farm. And so in order for them to interact with us, we have to create NDAs with them. And all of these NDAs were always customized. So you have the person's name, it was very time consuming for our legal team to create all of these NDAs. So what we did is we actually utilized Microsoft Forms. And so we give this person or this entity, this company that wants to do business with us, we give them this link to a Microsoft form. They fill out the form with contact information. And what that does is whenever they submit that, we have a Power Automate flow that picks up that data, grabs the key data from that, puts that into Microsoft Word template, PDFs it, sends it off to our legal team for final verification that's already filled out, ready to go. And then from there, it's automatically sent back to that person. Once our legal team approves it, it's sent back to that company for the execution. So now our legal team is saving time because they're not actually having to generate these NDAs. And sometimes we'll get, maybe 3 or 4 requests a week, and it just takes time to generate that stuff. And then we also have a lot of Power Automate flows to help processing of invoices for our Dynamics 365 F&O environment. So, as we receive invoices, we send that to our RPA engine that grabs that and then processes it and sends it into Dynamics 365. So moving forward, I'll wrap up my portion of it. Traditionally, before we went, with the Microsoft solution, we had a lot of siloed applications, and so it was very difficult for us as an organization to kind of glue all of that information together. So as we've moved into the Power Platform, that's allowed us to essentially tie all that together. Instead of us having to build manual relationships and try to figure out how this data is glued together, the Power Platform has enabled us to kind of provide a platform for our business partners to be able to consume that data in a central UI, right, or in central apps. Moving forward, we currently utilize the Microsoft Dataverse for a lot of our applications, all of our model-driven apps, our CE, F&O environment, some of those. So we're going to continue leveraging that and pushing forward, leveraging the Azure Data Lake integration with that for a lot of our Power BI. that we're trying to pull. So, you know, it's trying to automate a lot of that solutions that right now the integration's there, but moving forward, we're going to try to automate that a little bit more and help our business partners get that information, you know, in a more real-time manner. So, and then also leveraging functionality through model-driven apps, through business process modeling. We haven't really got into the business process modeling, but that's our next step, that what we're trying to do to help drive the process. You know, while they're familiar with the technology now, how can we put, you know, the process in the technology also? So I hope that helps understand, you know, helps understand kind of where Golden Spread is, how we've utilized it, and how we plan on utilizing it in the future.
That's fantastic, Sean, and just great. Thanks for sharing that journey with us. I mean, it's just very interesting. Two themes, you know, I think one is what we talked about, which is the importance of IT working with the business and finding your path as it relates to creating innovation together. And then two, you know, which you're representing and showing us here, which is really a systematic way of thinking about how you're going to take these technologies based on where you're at in maturity life cycles. Like, as a business, to your point, you couldn't do a full replace or a full net new, you know, we're going to consume everything because it was too disruptive. So you clearly understood where your end customer, you know, your business users were, and then really started at where was the impact, the greatest impact going to be as it relates to this tool. And then over time, we had a roadmap as where we wanted to go with it as you continue to do that. So it's very impressive to see how you all have, you know, worked together, and also the strategy that you've been able to execute. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We're going to jump over to you now. And I think you got some great perspective there on from Sean, and just, you know, a great use case as it relates to, you know, really how this platforms like this can really change your business.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think I was taking notes as Sean was going through it. First of all, it's so gratifying to see, as a product developer, right? It's so gratifying to see magic happen. And really, it is magical, because it's not just the application of the implementation of a Power BI dashboard. It really is, as Matt was saying, the emotional, the organizational awareness of where your organization is, what would be enough of a bite-sized chunk that gets you towards the longer-term vision that you have for your company to drive towards. But don't do it too much, because it may be an organ rejection that goes through, and you just have to do it in a way where you're delivering value while also building a platform that you can then accrue. The second project is easier because you did the first project as well. So I think it just reinforces so much of how we see ideally how our customers are able to adopt the platform and go forward. It's just a great example to be able to see that. Thank you, Sean, for that, walking us through. So what I thought I'd do here is just to go through a few content for people not familiar with Power Platform, just to give you an overall view of the Power Platform capabilities, and then just double down on something that Sean also covered, which is the platform nature of Power Platform. But before I get there, this is the Power Platform. Matt had a slide on it earlier as well, and you've seen the different products we provide in the Power Platform: Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agent, in a foundation of over 470 different connectors, with ability to embed AI with this Dataverse that used to be called Common Data Service, CDS. Before that, Sean talked about from a model-driven perspective as well. That's the model that surfaces in the model-driven way. So I'll do one slide for each one of them just to orient people together. This is Power BI. Power BI, hopefully most of you are familiar with. This is a great way for whether it's your business analysts or your centralized data teams to be able to bring data culture at scale throughout your organization. Great set of visualizations, great set of connectors through direct query as well, to have low latency queries, as Sean was talking about, his reports on top of the dynamic system. And it really is, when it was introduced, it introduced the software as a service notion, a cloud-centric. It's easy to get started. Internally, we talk about 5 seconds to sign up and 5 minutes to wow. That's a theme that we really built Power BI behind, because it was such a disruptive model for people that were used to on-premises deployments of big BI systems, OLAP systems, or data warehouse systems. And this really unlocked that quick adoption of being able to visualize data and make decisions based on data. In fact, when we were building Power BI, I met with a CIO of a company, and he said, the company will be unnamed, but the CIO said, I don't know what it is about the managers these days. They want data to make decisions, which was such a foreign concept to this person back a few years back, which is just, no, you made it with gut, you made it with the information you were getting, data. Yeah. Maybe that supports your decision making, but it isn't the cause of which decision that you select. So I think we've moved from that world to a data being just a fundamental building block for how you make decisions. So that's Power BI. The next one I'll talk about is Power Apps, and Sean talked about how they're using Power Apps as well. And for those not familiar, if you wanted to build web applications or mobile applications using very simple to use controls, Power Apps is the way to go. That allows you to build applications very quickly. It, of course, taps into the same connectivity infrastructure that I talked about. So now 470 connectors that are available out of the box for you to be able to get data all the way from Adobe to Zendesk and everything in the middle. That's what Power Apps is. Next one would be Power Automate. And Power Automate is where I spend most of my time on my day job. Power Automate is for automation, as the name implies. And this really is all the way from simple automations when my boss sends me an email, send me a notification on my phone, all the way to I'm doing payroll processing and order processing. Microsoft itself, all the orders we get from our customers go through Power Automate, where it goes through triage rules of, okay, who are you that sent in the order? Are you authorized to send in the order? We have some special rules we check for government submissions as well. And then once all those triage rules happen, then there is a front end on top of an SAP system where we use RPA to move data from all this cleaned up way into that front end. Because as a modern organization, we still have legacy systems that we've inherited and built over time. And it's just being able to bridge across both of them as we modernize the system, but also standing on the shoulders of existing legacy applications, being able to automate across both of them is a key value prop for Power Automate. And so that's the use case for that. All the way, it scales all the way from simple personal automations to your back-end business processes that are running your mission-critical systems. So that's Power Automate. And then finally, Power Virtual Agents. And the intention here is to be able to have conversational experiences on top of your data, whether it's exposed externally. So you may have a customer interaction system that says, it just does a quick Q&A, frequently asked questions with your customers. And maybe as a backend, what you want to do is be able to have an automation get kicked off because you want to enter information into your ticketing system, and there's no customer service agent available right now. So that integration between virtual agents and Power Automate is also built into the platform as well, to just have a conversational front end, but in the back end, you can do the depth of what Power Automate allows you to do. So those are the 4 products in the portfolio as well. So now let's talk about the platform. We've talked about Power Platform, and it's more than just a marketing term that stitches these all together. And let's dig into really what makes it a platform. And I'll cover 3 things here. The first one is they're intentionally designed to be better together. Yep. So what you'll see here is this is the Power Platform as we described it to be. But really, if you could pivot it another way. And the way I like to pivot it is to see how deeply integrated all of these artifacts are, all of these products are with each other. So if we go on, what you'll see is when you look at Power Automate itself, in Power BI, in the dashboard itself, what you could say is if my service level agreement drops below a certain point, go kick off an automation. Or in my application in Power Apps, I could just click a button and go kick off an automation. Or if I'm inside my chat experience and as a backend, I want to go enter this data into my legacy ticketing system, go kick off an automation. These are all designed in Redmond to work better together, right? It's not you get a system integrator in and you wire these disparate set of technologies together. As Sean was mentioning, the foundation of where they started was Office 365 and the identity system and this Azure Active Directory. Everything else accrues on top of that. So you don't have to have separate identity systems. Just to, as an example, where you have separate conditional access management or separate identities you have to replicate together, is all intentionally designed to work better together. So that's the first concept of a platform that's designed better together, to be better together. The second one, I'd say, is composable as well. And what I mean by that with a common data model is when you think about your business, usually, so on the next slide, what you think about is usually business have employees, they have customers, they have products, and they have operations. And usually from a digital transformation perspective, what you look at is how do I optimize each one of them, right? I want to have faster interactions with my customers, like better experiences. I want to drive my operations or optimize them. I want to build great products and have employees that are just loving every moment of how they're working on the team together. And usually we think of these as disparate activities that you do. But really the magic of this composable common data model that Sean talked about is to be able to have a unified view of what the data is across these different blades, so that you can incorporate all this data, all your customer data that's coming in, all the operations data coming in, your employee, your products telemetry data coming in, into a single coherent data model. And what that allows you to do then is to be intelligent about it. So now you can, once you have all the data, that you can rationalize across them. And Sean had a great example when they were talking about the Power BI dashboard, how you had different dynamic systems that were all, it's the same data space that you've put in all the data together, unlocks these connection points between these different verticals that would have been siloed before. And he talked about how these were all siloed solutions before. But this is the magic of a common data model that you're able to then derive intelligence from, and then to drive action out of. Right? This is, at the end of the day, actions is what matters, not insights for the sake of insights. And what this allows you to do then is to be able to have these, one more click then, is the signals going back in. These are all the loops. We call this the digital feedback loop within an organization, because all of this feeds on top of each other. The more signals I can get from how the products are getting used, the more I can engage, I can build better experiences for my customers, the more I can have happier employees that drive faster operations as well. It all accrues better together for this this combination that you can unlock with the fact that you have a shared common data model. So that's a key part of how we look at integration across the platforms, not just from a product to product perspective, but really the foundation is shared across them to unlock this level of transformation in the enterprise. So that's the second point. The third one is around how you have what Gartner calls fusion teams. And usually when fusion teams is essentially teams, recognition that many organizations have people with different skills. I may be great in Excel, I may not be a great coder. I may have somebody down the hall or down the floor that's great at coding, not as knowledgeable about the business. Maybe somebody is great in data science, but they're not as knowledgeable about the other aspects as well. So you have a mixture of these skills within your enterprises. And again, going back to the silo point, usually it ends up being siloed applications and siloed deliveries that you do. Job requirements or product requirements go over the fence, somebody else builds it, and they deliver a result back to you. And really what we think of from a modern development world for applications is to say, what if your citizen developers, your business users, your data scientists, your professional developers could work together on the same platform where they're able to leverage the best of what each can do. As a professional developer, I know I live day in, day out on Visual Studio, and I know the CI/CD pipelines in Azure. That's my strength. That's the competency I bring to bear for my organization. How do I merge that? How do I create artifacts, whether they're controls, whether they're connectors that I can now expose to citizen developers that are building automations or applications and embed them within their own applications. So that magic of more professional developers creating artifacts that business users can use, the citizen developers can use, the more citizen developers creates them, the more the need there is for professional developers to build these again. So that flywheel of having just these composable artifacts that you end up building for solving different solutions done in a way that's organizationally aware. If you want to connect to SAP system, this is the formal way of connecting to it. Don't go around it. I'm just giving you a simple way of doing that. So just putting guardrails into place and helping people be more effective at scale. So that's the third part of Power Platform and developers. And then finally, empowering. It's all great if you give people tools to make them effective, but you have to do that with confidence. And part of that is putting these quality controls into place, putting the data loss prevention policies into place, putting enterprise grade management and scale into place, so that if you have an organization with 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 employees, like Microsoft does, and you make all these tools available to everybody else, how do you manage the assets getting used responsibly, right? We don't want to show up on the news because somebody leaked some data. We try to avoid as much as possible. And the way we do that is by putting these guardrails in place that help honest people stay honest, because they really, we don't have, for most part, we don't have malicious people that want to bypass our controls. People want to do the right things, but they want to do it in a way that they can do confidently, and the organization can enable confidently as well. So this driving innovation at scale requires a separate level of capabilities. So this is essentially a summary of the Power Platform. We went through all these 4 things together, and just in the interest of time, we could just move on to the next one. Hopefully that gave you a good sense of where we are from a Power Platform perspective.
Yeah, Ash, I love your passion. You know, and I feel the same way. It's, you know, if being in the business app space for many years, you know, it's fun to see where we can go with platforms like this now, and the ease by which we can do things that were, you know, months and years before, and maybe we never got there, and you know, and the outcome was never achieved. So I feel the excitement, and to your point with Sean, just seeing customers and where they're taking it, it's just as awesome. And so,
you know, just to kind of illustrate Ash's point, I'd like to say is like from a end user perspective, you know, I work in IT, but our #1 Power BI group is our operations group, because we've introduced the technology to them, we got them up to speed, and they far surpassed anything from an IT perspective that we're able to do with Power BI, because they're in it every day, building out these analytics for the data that they get and what they're handling. So really, citizen development, you know, I mean, that's what they're doing. They're on a daily basis, they are building out Power BI reports, and I mean, they come to us periodically, but like, hey, how do I connect to this other data that's sitting over here? We'll help them do the connection, but from a Power BI perspective, I mean, they're the guys.
So Sean, it's a great point. Tell me, like, kind of how do you guys set up governance, and how do you? It's a great example where, and it sounds like you've got some guidelines there, because the business knows to come back to you with, hey, I'm not, you know, they don't go too far where they're going to get themselves in the weeds. But talk to us a little bit about kind of how you all manage the governance of, you know, tools like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely try to, as Ash said, we try to keep the guardrails up, right, and make sure that nobody's going, you know, too crazy. You know, we try to make sure that from a platform perspective, we know about the data from an IT perspective. We know where the data is, you know, and it's not that we're controlling the data. We want to make sure that they're, you know, our business partners, they know the data better than we do. They just might not know how to connect to that, right? So we make sure that, you know, they understand that they're connecting to the right data source, because maybe we have it in a staging environment that we let them play with, and then we help them migrate that data to a production environment, you know. So but the actual building of that is, you know, it's been important for us because of the traditional siloed data where they didn't really have access to anything. You know, as IT is starting to migrate that, you know, we have been able to control that just by the nature of kind of how we've done the migrations and made it happen. So it's kind of organically grown. But the critical thing moving forward, as you mentioned, is making sure that as these things grow, the Power Platform allows us to keep a little more control on it, because as Ash said, it's in a single platform. As long as we can keep the data as much as possible within the Dataverse, I almost said CDS, as long as we can keep it in the data in Microsoft Dataverse, it helps with that data governance perspective, because we know that the data going in and coming out of that is cleansed, it's good, and that's actionable data.
Awesome, great perspective. And Ash, I'm going to come back to you in a little bit, because I think it'd be good for you to talk about, the COE program around this, and I know we're a partner for that, but also just the kind of templated way that customers can look at this. We'll hit that at the end. So I'll give you our perspective, and really what we saw as a wave in the market and this whole movement, and not just from the technology side, but exactly what you're hearing from Sean from the business side of, how companies are looking at technology differently, and what we call the platform way of thinking. And so we've come up with both a method, tool set, and way of helping companies really build what we call platform-based business models. So, in the traditional digital sense, these are digital-born businesses like the Amazons of the world. But we're all going to become Amazon, and we don't necessarily need to become that. But I think there's some learnings there as it relates to a platform-based business model, and you've heard that with some of what Sean is shared earlier, which is number one, it's thinking about the stakeholders and your partners, your employees, your members, your whatever that ecosystem looks like, and how do we bring value to them? How do we empower them? It's creating stickiness, in that ecosystem, so there's a bit of dependency, and so you have a bit more strength with your customers and partners, and you do better business together. And then there's obviously the value insights as it relates to if we can get hands-on data to what Ash was saying and get insights in there. There's all these new learnings about the business, about our stakeholders, and how we can drive better value to them, and so on. So there's many more themes about that, but what we saw is that, and what we see as the opportunity and why we created Platformation was, it's really helping different industries find their platform-based business model. And again, not to become the next Amazon, but really it just is a good engineering mindset that drives tremendous value. And what we're finding is statistically a much higher level of confidence in companies actually realizing the outcomes that they're trying to get to. And so we've designed this in a way that it's a very systematic way, very structured way to de-risk projects, and also help companies really prioritize where they can drive value in part of their transformation journey. Whether with a tool like Power Platform or with from the ground up in open source or whatever it may be. So when we look at really the building blocks of what does that look like, in particular when you think about asset-intensive industries, and so. And what makes it different from other methods? It's really about, if you look traditionally how we look at businesses and IT investments, traditionally, particularly in asset-intensive businesses, it's very inside-out looking, meaning what defines our systems, what defines our requirements is very much internal view. We've got these needs, requirements, we've done things these ways, and as a result, that's what drives our design and what systems we go look and find and how well does it meet our needs and all that kind of stuff, versus a design thinking kind of concept, which is outside in. So going back to that stakeholder perspective, really looking at their view and how do I drive value from the customer's view or from my partner's view or from and Sean, great example to your customers, which are your employees and partners. It totally changes how we think about technology and ultimately what technology we build, buy, and look at. And so if we start to do that, what platform thinking really helps us do, and again, you've heard some of this throughout, which is it's looking at creating value, so that decisions are driven by value and not by a feature function, or we've always done it this way. It's about extracting learnings and knowledge. Particularly you look at asset-intensive industries, they sit on a ton of data, particularly from the control and the asset side of things, and they're really not monetizing it beyond really looking at, effectively managing those systems and keeping them running. But ultimately downstream, how we can use that data, learn from it, provide better customer experiences, ultimately run the business better, manage our cash better as it relates to the capital side. And it goes to that feedback loop that Ash was talking about. And then scale, Ash talked about this as well. So it's having the ability that we're building from the ground up the right foundation that allows us to scale as the business scales, not just up, but down. I mean, you look at what we just went through with COVID. I mean, Sean, even what you all just went through with the weather in Texas. I mean, these are massive events that we could never predict in a million years that would happen. And we don't have agility and scale, up and down capability in our platforms, and we've got major issues. And then connections, this too, Ash talked about, and I think this is what the digital world is really kind of lit up. And I think it's been a long time coming for us that have been in the industry for a long time, where we had connections. They were very rudimentary connections, but it was very difficult. Take the simple example of an individual line worker out in the field that's working offline. They're totally on their own, and they're self-serving on their own situation or a problem. Versus now we've got a connected substation. There's feedback loop back to the control and engineering group, and so they're in communication with that end lineman, and just a much better, safer environment, much more intelligent action that's being taken, and ultimately drives down to more resilient type of infrastructure and service. And then finally, really the match side. I mean, you see this tremendously in both the energy and the utility space, which is a big challenge, both from the cost side of things on how we do our long-term capital planning, as well as what are the right actual energy elements that we bring to market, and at the right time. So these huge influxes is supply and demand, and really timing that right is huge impacts to our business. And so how do we capture that, and how do we make it more predictable? So if you look at the kind of the constructs of what we've designed is really kind of bringing that all into a structured way. So the bottom is what I talked about earlier, which is that outside in. We're looking at our key stakeholders. They're what's driving ultimately what the system characteristics need to be. And then ultimately from there, it drives how we prioritize the projects we're going to do and what those building blocks need to be. Much of what we see in the market and we hear today is they may have a great strategy. They've gone either internal, external, and they've got their digital agenda, but they're just struggling with how do we execute on it? What should our roadmap be? What do those building blocks need to be? And I think that's the biggest difference you're seeing today in the digital world. We didn't have to, it was pretty straightforward how you could either lift and shift systems or how you move systems, even early days of on-prem to the cloud. But now with digital, there's so many different elements that you have to consider. And if you don't get those building blocks right, then you can have downstream effects for that. Next, please. So here's just an example of really kind of what this looks like, just a simple utility example. So, we work with customers in kind of three different phases, and I'll talk next about really maturity. So what you're seeing on the left side is this is a customer coming to us and saying, hey, help us define what our platform-based business model is. If you look at utility business or oil and gas, it's very linear business model. And today where it's going is a very non-linear. So you've got customers that are contributing energy back to the grid. You've got different type of consumers now that are using different applications. There's a much more demand as it relates to help me as an end consumer learn how to best use energy and so on. And so it's totally disrupting how we think about our business, and it's changing the way we go from inside out to that outside in. We have to start thinking about that. So one thing we start with customers is just helping them shape that. The middle is kind of really about themes. So this is the example I mentioned to you, which is, hey, they've got a digital agenda. They have some big pillars out there that they know that they want to do, but they need to really qualify those themes and then rationalize those into actual projects. And so if you take Power Platform, for example, and if we're looking at these as our three key themes, how do we take Power Platform, and to your example, Sean, do we start with data? Do we start with model-driven apps? Kind of where do we start logically to kind of start recognizing the value here? And then ultimately that drives the constructs of what that system needs to be, i.e., again, what are the data requirements? What are the connectivity environments? And then what are the other parts of the ecosystem that either our partners or customers or systems we have to deal with? Next, please. So where we like to start, and I think where a lot of companies fail, is understanding their maturity, and many different ways to look at maturity out there. But what we find is that many companies, you know, they're either in a desperate stage because of what we just went through and they weren't prepared. So it's a desperation to go out and just buy that silver bullet, and it's going to solve what we have, this huge issue, because in this, you know, the case, the utility example, our grid is not hardened and we've got major issues going on. Or it is, you've got amazing innovation going on, but it's in pockets of the company, and the value down the chain as it relates to across the business is not there. And then you've got total risk adverse, you know, which is really about, we're just not ready to go there. So let's just pilot something, and, you know, we're just not sure where to start and where to begin. And so when you look at it from a digital perspective, there's kind of 4 quadrants that we see, you know, the beginners, the challengers, the technovators, and then the visionaries. And ultimately, the quicker a company can realize where they're at in that process, the more successful they'll be. You heard that from Sean as it relates to how they approach the business, and what they knew not to take to the business, and to what scope to take to the business, and then ultimately getting the business to trust them, to then allow them to work together to ultimately drive innovation from the upper right, which we call that top down. Upper right is really where you've got someone sitting in the CEO seat or someone in the C-suite that basically says, listen, we have a mandate to go from here to here. We're going to double the business in the next 3 years. And we think these are the 2 key milestones. And so we have to systematically change as a culture to get there. These are going to be the owners. These are the processes we're going to go after. And then ultimately, we're going to either work internally to make it happen or work with partners and get there. Versus what you'll see with the technovators, where you're seeing, again, very smart people, a lot of it coming out of IT, but they're, a good example in the energy market is it's very much focused on the asset side, but it stays over there, and it really, data is a great example. There's so many different energy companies that we work with that the operations side sits on this awesome data. They've got all this great digital stuff going on as it relates to asset monitoring and even control command type stuff. But the 2 universes should never cross as it relates to that data with the rest of the business data. And then, you know, in the bigger portfolio companies where, you know, you've got a retail side to it, you know, where you can really take that data and bring better products to market and provide better service. It's really interesting to see. So ultimately, where you want to get to is understanding your maturity, and then from that, defining a roadmap and plan to help get you there. We kind of look at it from 3 elements as it relates to kind of easy starts. One is first and foremost a digital maturity assessment. So this is really looking at the organization as a whole, and looking at both the cultural side and the technology side to say kind of where are we at, and, you know, what could we do, and what should those building blocks look like. And then kind of behind that is really looking at creating a center of excellence. So what are the governance elements? You heard me talking to Sean about kind of governance, because it's critically important that we understand that what are the disciplines that we have to use and do when we're talking about platforms, we're talking about transformation, to ultimately ensure that we get to success. At the same time, we foster that contribution, not just from IT, but, you know, other stakeholders in that ecosystem, to then all get there and provide value through this transformation together. The other one to the right is kind of what we call the bottom up, you know, so this is that low risk one. It's basically the business is not sure. Sean said he did some of this in the early days, you know, we've got to bring something to the business. So this is where we either, in our case, we know an industry, we know some use cases that can create value, and we're bringing that in as a pilot. And then from there, it's getting trust and traction. And then we kind of go back to the strategy side to say, okay, now that we see this, we've rationalized this, we understand the impact of the business. It's interesting what you'll see is they'll start thinking about all these different parts of the business. I'm sure you've seen that as it relates to some of the projects you've done, where all of a sudden the light goes off and they're like, wow, we never knew we could do this. And we've got 3 other things that we could probably, actually, we had that happen with some of your membership stuff, and you know, others saw that what others had done, and it was a lot, you know, easier path than they expected, and the value that they see in other pockets of the organization is tremendous. So in closing, and I'll go to the panel for kind of closing thoughts here, but I think, you know, the 3 key themes I think that I pulled away from this discussion, I appreciate you all being part of it, is, you know, Sean gave awesome representation about, you know, the importance of what I consider good DNA, both in IT and business. You know, your member owners should be grateful for what they have in your organization, because it's not common to hear that type of willingness to work together, smart method by which to earn trust and ultimately come together on a roadmap and vision, and then realizing that together and empowering those different stakeholders to actually, you know, bring value, and together the entire ecosystem drives value. I think the other element is really about a theme you heard me talk about before, and Ash talked about it as well, which is this whole concept of platforms. And, you know, it's not about that they're big and heavy. It's more about the building blocks and driving the value when we think about the context of a platform, and not just an app or a data, you know, just a data tool or something like that. But in the digital world, you know, it's important to understand the different components, both from a prioritization as well as how you create those building blocks to get the value. And then final point is really just about maturity. I can't harp enough about that. Sean gave a great example of that. And just, you know, before you jump into transformation, and we see a lot of customers that have stalled out because they either, you know, they went hyper focused on the super techie digital, you know, siloed system, and it wasn't a fundamental shift in the culture and buy into kind of what they were doing, or it was a proliferation of, you know, of apps that weren't governed properly, and now they're having to harness it back and say, okay, we got to redefine what this platform is, and we've got to roll this out, you know, properly. So, Sean, go to you for last word, and then I'll go over to Ash for final comments.
Thanks. Again, I appreciate y'all inviting me to participate in this discussion that we've had. I guess my last word would be become familiar with the platform that's available to you. You know, the Power Platform, as we become familiar with it, it allows your business to utilize those tools, even if it's not from an IT perspective. If IT is familiar with that, that allows you to communicate to the business what some of those capabilities are. You know, we have compliance people using Power Automate flows that is not a part of IT, but they're building out solutions for themselves and that allow them to be successful. So it's not necessarily leveraging our time and our resources from an IT perspective, but we're providing that platform and that usability to them, you know, and they're not scared because we've enabled them to be successful using those tools.
Awesome. And Ash?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I'm so excited. I'm so glad I got a chance to be in this call. Just really to listen and hear about how it's working. And this is why we build software to begin with, right? It is to move the world forward. And if there's any feedback as you look at the Power Platform, as you look at gaps in the platform, as you know, where you want to take it and the platform isn't ready in cases, or you want to put it on creative use, I'd love to hear back from get any feedback on where we should be taking the product itself. We're really proud of what we've built so far, and we know it can be improved even further. So thank you for the engagement. Thank you for the opportunity, Matt.
It's awesome, and I appreciate your all's time. And hopefully for everybody that participated and those that watch, you know, this has hopefully been a learning for everybody, and a couple of perspectives on really what can be done and you know, transformation success and how to make it less scary.
So guys, great job today. I think I learned more about Power Platform on this call and kind of the application of it than I have on the last 20 webinars I've done. So thank you to everybody who joined and stuck with us today. I know a few of you had some questions. You've noticed we've run about 5 minutes over the hour. So we're not going to be able to do Q&A today, but if you submitted the questions, I'm going to take those to the team and we'll get you some answers back. If you still have questions you'd like to ask, you can see on the screen there, you can email them directly to Matt info@sonata-software.com, or you can give him a call on his personal private cell phone, which we've now published for the entire world to consume. So anyway, thank you for attending the How Asset Heavy Companies Are Transforming with Power Platform event today. And Ash, Sean, and Matt, thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.